Hey everybody, I'm working on a dog bone dagger here. It's a pretty nice dagger. It's going to be fancy. But I've had something happen with it that most knife makers have dealt with, no matter what style of knife they've made, and that's with a little bit of warp after heat treat. This just has a tiny, tiny bit of warp to it. And a lot of knife makers would probably let it go. Um, But if you're going to be a top level maker, you can't let things go. It's just the slightest warp. It's actually really hard to see. It's easier to see if I get it on like a flat surface. I have a big piece of like a big stone type piece of granite that I can lay it on, and I can flip it over back and forth and see. So this is the blade. Here's the dagger. Get it up here. This brown and whatnot is from after the tempering process. It's come out of the oven. Uh, I just heat treated it. I explained in some earlier videos, I left some thickness on my edge when I heat treated, so I got a little room to grind. And if you've watched any of the earlier ones, I left a real small flat all the way up this blade to about here. And if I get that just right, you can see that flat. I don't actually have a true center line yet. It's a flat, and it's on both sides. And I said in that video, if I have to lay this thing back on the surface grinder at all, I'll be able to have a flat surface all the way down that blade. So when that lays there flat on that magnet, I don't have a curve or something that it's going to rock on. It's going to sit there real nice and flat. So if I get this really, really close to being straight, I can then put it on my surface grinder and just take a tiny bit off of it. We're talking thousandths, a few thousandths, maybe 5, 10 off of each side at the most. I also left this blade just a fuzz thicker than I maybe need to towards the end. After doing this for years, sometimes it's a good idea to just give yourself a little bit of wiggle room. And so if you look down this, and it's going to be really hard to tell because it's hard to tell when you're not looking through a camera, there's just the slightest bow, and it goes this direction. And so I put an X on the side that the tip goes to. That way when I'm out there working on it, I don't lose track. And it's just the slightest bow right up in here. It wants to walk off that way a tiny bit. And so I also put a bit of a line up in this area between like here and here is where I kind of want to do my straightening. You can kind of see that on there, that Sharpie. So this is a hard blade, and it's fully hardened. It's not edge quenched. There's nothing really soft on it. So if I just stick that in a vise and I pry on it, I might get it, but it might not bend exactly where I want, right? It might bend up in here, it might bend here, it might bend way too much. I've got really no control. The other thing that can happen is it can crack. And I don't want, obviously we don't want to break this blade. It's a really nice Damascus blade. So if I apply a little bit of heat to the center of that blade, right in here with a torch, and at the same time I'm applying some heat, I put a little torque on it. When it does give, and you can actually feel it if you're really paying attention, you can slightly feel that blade give in a little bit to that heat. And I'll stop, and I'll come back and I'll recheck it, and I'll keep looking, and occasionally I'll go too far. Maybe I got to torque it back, but at least I know exactly where. If I want to bend it here, I put my heat here, and it'll go right there. So in the case that you have a knife that maybe is pretty straight and then it really wows off in one spot, that's the way you can kind of fix that. If it bows over a longer area, you might do 2 or 3 different spots and kind of work on getting it straight. And then that's what the thickness in my edge also does for me. If I get this really close, but not quite perfect, then I can grind it exactly straight. This is always like one of the scariest processes for guys, especially newer guys or guys that aren't as experienced. We've all broken blades in our time or cracked them. and until we've been really taught by somebody good how to fix it. That being said, hopefully I don't screw it up. But if I break it, you're going to see it here, or crack it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little sandpaper and I'm just going to clean it off because I actually want it to be silver. So I want to be able to see the color in my blade. I don't want to get this thing red hot. I'll affect the temper of it. I don't want to take the temper out. I just want to get kind of some blue, and I want to get enough heat in there to where it'll actually bend on that spot. So got a little 220 grit sandpaper here. And all I'm doing here is just taking that oxidization from the heat treatment process off. So if you get the light right, see, now I got a little bit of silver. This side's still kind of dark. Okay, so we're gonna go out to my Ford shop and I'm gonna work on straightening this. We'll try and get this set up. I actually have my phone clamped in vice grips with a piece of leather as if it's a knife handle. I'm a bit new to this whole phone YouTube thing, so we'll see if I can get it set up to where you can actually see something. I'm going to lay this in on my press. Well, here, I'll show you my hydraulic press. There's my press. And my vise is right here. I'm going to see if I can prop us up. Let's try and get kind of somewhat in line with that vise. I don't want my phone to tip over. Let's see here. Maybe I'll prop you up. This might actually work in here if I can get it set up. Nobody's going to ask me to make the next big picture movie, but I don't want to hang around those people anyway. Okay. So I'm in here in the vise. Looks like we can kind of see. Maybe since I'm clamped in vice grips, I'll just torque it a little. There. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clamp this blade. This blade walks off, like I said, I've got my lines, it walks off this way. I'm actually going to, I like pulling into my heat. So I'm going to clamp this blade right up in here. Okay. Maybe I can kind of show you what that looks like here. So I've just got it in the jaws. I don't have it protected in leather or anything. Like I say, this blade has to get ground. So there it is, just clamped in there. Okay. Try and not have that crash. All right. I don't like to use a propane torch like this one. I don't like to do that because it doesn't get it hot enough fast enough. The heat just spreads out in the blade, and it's not a specific spot. Because as soon as I get this thing where I want it, I'm actually going to dip this in water, but I'm not at such a heat that it's going to hurt the blade. You don't want to dunk a blade in water that's like red hot. But I'm going to dunk it in water just to get that heat out of the blade so I actually don't hurt anything. So we're going to get this flame adjusted here. We don't need this. We just need a slight little flame. See how that's rolling black smoke off? We don't want that. It's going to put soot all over the blade. As low as I can get this torch to go and not pop out on me. So I'm just going to put a nice little point right on that blade. And at the same time, I'm going to pull. All right. So I put a little pressure on my blade and I go right here close. Okay, so I just set my torch down. I actually dunked that in water. I don't want to heat that blade too much. So see, I just got a little bit of color in there, a little bit of blue back here, but it's not really down even in my edges. It's no big deal. And I'm going to take a look. And I might do this a few times. I don't want to screw up and go way too far. And in fact, it looks to me like I actually maybe went too far, which shows you, make sure my torch isn't lighting my wall on fire. It shows you how easy it is to make that move. Maybe I didn't go too far. Let's see, which way is that? It might be okay. So instead of guessing, I'm gonna take the time to go put it on my flat piece of stone here and really kind of check some things. This is a very expensive knife, and there's no sense in guessing. I don't like to guess when I make knives. So let's see if I can get you set up. This area in my shop's a mess. Normally I'm pretty clean. We'll get that mill handle out of the way in a second here. Let's see, crank that mill handle that way. Okay, here's this flat stone. Lay the blade on it, and I'm gonna hold down on that blade, and I'm actually getting down level with that blade, and I'm looking. And I'm wanting to see if I can see light underneath those flats. Okay, and the other thing I can do is look at my tip and see how much my tip is sticking up off of the table. Okay, so I actually need to... So I did go a fuzz too far, which is all right. I'll just take it back. I like to confirm what my eye is seeing. These a dagger especially can play tricks on you. So I just like to confirm what I'm seeing. Make sure it's in fact what I'm actually seeing. And sometimes you can have a couple different little torques or bends in this. Get a look again. Stick it in here. I'm actually going to pull the other way on this one here. Dunk that in water. That looks to be getting close. I think we're about there. So I'm going to go confirm that on my stone, but that's how you straighten a blade. Things that help in the heat treating process, and I showed this in an earlier video. When I quench a blade, I clamp it in some jaws to help keep that blade straight, but man, sometimes you can get still just the tiniest bow. But that was quick and it was simple. And if I wasn't messing around with the phone, it would have only taken me a couple minutes, right? Don't just torque on these blades cold. Put a tiny bit of heat to it. You can see just a tiny bit of color in that blade, right in the center. It doesn't even go to the edge. It won't affect my etch. No damage done. It's still going to work well if it had to be used. And it's straight. So moving on to the next step. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it.